So Nuno out and Ange in. And we've got to, of course, get all the details from our mate, Ben Jacobs. Welcome to the stream. Ben, how you doing, mate? I know we're tight on time, so I'll save all the usual pleasantries, but everything well with you, buddy?
Everything is good. The window's shut, but Nottingham Forest giving us stories and drama as ever, even beyond September the 1st.
Welcome to the world of Forest. I want to jump straight into it, mate. Can we start with the Nuno side of things? Obviously, we saw the press conference and everything else where he pulled the pin out the grenade. But from what you know has happened between then and now? There was a lot of talks of they were going to have conversations. They didn't have conversations. They were going to have clear the air talks. There's a lot of kind of information going around there. Do you know if there has been any communication in that period between Marinakis, Edu and Nuno at all?
I mean, of course, there's been communication, but the nail in the coffin was the press conference. And I actually think it wasn't as clear cut that Nuno would be sacked until he spoke in that press conference. And Forest sources on the morning before it, on August the 22nd, were very much intimating that suggestions he might go were nonsense. Then he said his piece publicly. And from there, I think there was no way back. And the perspective from Nottingham Forest side is that it was an explosive rant and that it created an untenable situation. And since then, Nuno's been going about his business well aware that the club was succession planning, with Ange Postecoglou always the top choice. And as ever, when a manager goes at midnight or so on a Monday and then by a Tuesday lunch, a new manager's in place, that tells you that the legwork to get Ange Postecoglou was done during this international break. And my feeling is that Nottingham Forest felt that it would be disruptive to fire a manager in the final week of a window because they were, of course, recruiting. And similarly, you got Premier League games. So you get through that difficult period and then a change was always likely, as we've now seen during the international break.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind 48 hours, but I do tend to agree with you since we've seen that quick turnaround over the night. Do you feel these conversations were happening early into that international break and that Nuno's fate was probably sealed a little while back?
Yeah, but Marinakis was exploring a change even before. It just wasn't as clear cut. So the contact with Ange Postecoglou, as we revealed exclusively on TalkSport, dates actually all the way back to late July, early August. But out of respect to the club and Nuno, Postecoglou was not prepared to formally interview for a vacancy that he didn't know whether it would or wouldn't materialize. And then, of course, after the press conference, I think all parties, including Nuno, realized that a change was necessary. And at that point, Postecoglou was prepared to speak more formally. And it was a relatively easy deal to strike. In many ways, typical Nottingham Forest that we've seen in some respects, where Marinakis picks his guy, he goes out there, he does a lot of the negotiation himself. He gets a deal. He gets to know the person he's bringing in on a personal level as well. He spoke glowingly in the past about how proud Ange Postecoglou is of his Greek heritage. And I think that helped as well. So now Marinakis has got a poster boy. And by that, I mean, and it might be sounding slightly strange because he's 60 years old and he's not one of these sort of young break on the scene managers. But he's a poster boy in the sense that everything Ange's philosophy represents: gung-ho, attack-minded football, risk-reward, bullishness, saying things like, I'm going to win a trophy in my second year. Why? Because I always do. These things resonate with Marinakis. So it's the right manager, the right style, the right personality fit, the right person that they think can coexist with Edu, which was a problem for Nuno. And as importantly, the person that can lead Nottingham Forest, and then others within this multi-club network will over time replicate. And remember, Edu's job is not just Nottingham Forest. It's about having a synergy and consistency of culture, of style. And when you want to build that, especially if you're going to add new clubs, you have to start with the biggest asset you've got. So everything is about Nottingham Forest setting an example and then that bleeding down to the other clubs. And I think this was a sticking point between Marinakis and Nuno in particular, that, of course, what he achieved, exceptional. We mustn't forget he was one of the best managers in the Premier League last season. He qualified for Europe. But style, visually, how it looks, what it represents, because eventually Marinakis wants to add a club in Brazil, expand his multi-club network, and have a consistency throughout. And it needs a manager that can lead that cultural and football and philosophical change by example, but also coexist in that bigger network. And I think the feeling with Nuno is that he only wanted Forest. He wanted quite a small squad, whereas maybe Ange Postecoglou is more willing to think not just about Nottingham Forest, but the wider project and ultimately multi-club.
Do we know yet what the I guess misunderstanding or direction that they weren't agreeing on was between Edu and Nuno? There was a lot of talk obviously about the likes of Adama Traore and things like that. Was this a power struggle between the two?
Yeah, I think with Adama Traore, it wasn't so much the signing as the reaction. So the backstory specifically on Adama Traore is that Nuno wanted him and knew him and managed him. And then Edu tried to get him. And this is where you get a deviation. And we have to be fair to both sides. So the perspective of Edu and Nottingham Forest is that they tried to get Adama Traore and Fulham wouldn't sell. And they certainly wouldn't do anything until they got a replacement. And you may note that Fulham only really brought in attackers in his kind of position in the final hours of the window. Whereas Nottingham Forest were looking for Adama 3 or 4 weeks before that. So that's just normal. We are empowering the manager to have a say. He wants Traore. We try and get him. We can't. And that will definitely be the Nottingham Forest perspective. So it doesn't sound like a big deal, right? But Nuno knows the player. And my understanding is that those on the managerial side called up Adama and said, do you want to come? And Adama said back to them, I don't have any approach or any offer. So this is where the story deviates. And it led to, my understanding, a relatively fiery confrontation at Nottingham Forest training ground that other senior members of staff had to get involved in. And at that point, I think Nuno felt like he was being bypassed in the same way that Marinakis has done a lot of the deals directly with John Textor when Botafogo players have come to Nottingham Forest, such as Igor Jesus. And then again, we have a second point, which is probably bigger than this one fallout, because the Adama Traore thing isn't that big, but it led to a reaction that showed the relationship was off on the wrong foot between Edu and Nuno. And I think actually when Nuno made his comments in the press conference about, I speak to the owner less, I've got a less good relationship, I don't think that was meant as directly towards Marinakis, because in the instance and example I gave, the owner was actually the peacemaker, I'm told, and he called up Nuno, tried to get him to calm down, tried to find a solution. Everybody needs to just sort of take a breath. But actually what Nuno was saying is, I'm speaking less to the owner because Edu and the owner are speaking, and there's basically a middleman between me and the owner that there wasn't in the previous season. So that's the sort of summer change. In other words, Edu is the big problem here. Then away from Adama Traore, because like I say, that was more just the confrontation after being almost overblown, making you think, why were they so fueled by Adama Traore? But it was kind of more the straw that broke the camel's back. But then you have other points of difference. Marinakis thinking he wants a more attack-minded, perhaps easy on the eye type of football. And Nuno feeling like the whole point here is I'm getting the best out of the players in front of me with a system that suits them, and I'm taking them into Europe. You can't ask for much more than that. And then at the beginning of the summer, there's again a second point of contention, which is around squad size. And Nottingham Forest, particularly Edu, were under the belief that Nuno was in favour of having a larger squad, which goes against what he's used to, and almost having the ability, if needed, to have 2 11s, one for the Premier League and one for the Conference League. And as the squad...
Europa,
The Europa League, yeah. Well, Europa Conference League qualification and then the upgrade to the Europa League. But obviously at the point they were discussing that, it genuinely was the Conference League, because we're talking right at the beginning of the summer. So that's actually quite interesting. And I stress Conference League because if you think about it, if you're in Premier League and Europa League, it's of a high enough standard that actually you might not need these 2 11s. But if you're in the Conference League, you might be thinking about your younger players and a fair amount more rotation. So the aim was basically to protect some of the signings at the beginning of the summer. And it may well be that when they then got bumped up to the Europa League, that changed a little bit. And Nuno said, I'm going to be using the same players across the board. let's make sure that we keep the squad size down. At that point, Edu said, but I thought the whole point was 2 11s. And Nuno said, this squad can't get above 27. And then right late in the window, you had those flurry of signings, all I think excellent players that will be really fantastic for Nottingham Forest. But the point for Nuno was not to look at Amari Hutchinson or James McAtee or Douglas Luiz when actually he wanted Mateus Fernandes, who went to West Ham. The point was more to say it's just signing after signing after signing. I'm going to have to leave some of these out. They're going to be unhappy because, again, you can leave a player out of Conference League squad and they might say, fine, I'll get in on the knockout stage. Chelsea did that with Cole Palmer. Yeah. But it's Europa League. Certain players have come to Nottingham Forest to play European football, and they won't be happy if they're in the so-called Premier League squad. So I actually think it didn't help Nottingham Forest from a dynamic chemistry, Edu, Nuno perspective to go up into the Europa League, because you have to approach your selection and therefore your recruitment a little bit differently. And that was definitely a point where Edu felt like everyone was on the same page, go and get 2 11s. Then suddenly they weren't. And the football department was saying the squad is too big. We're signing for the sake of signing. And I suppose we'll only know in terms of squad balance at the end of the season. Now Ange Postecoglou is going to get this campaign to find out whether there are too many players in the squad and if he can keep everybody happy.
That's absolutely fascinating to hear about the 2 11s and then the kind of merger, if you like, because of the Europa League squad. And what you're saying makes absolute sense. Would it be fair to say we've seen some kind of protest actions from Nuno in the likes of Douglas Luiz, for example, who we know Edu's been chasing even at his time at Arsenal? He wanted him. That's clearly an Edu signing. Yet we haven't seen a single minute of Douglas Luiz on the pitch. There's been a couple of other players that feel like they're Edu signings who maybe have got 1 minute at the end of the game to, pass the time and what have you. Has there been, do you feel, a bit of a protest vote from Nuno in the way he's been picking some of these players?
I don't think there was anything like that. Nuno, from what I'm told, even though it's been quite tense and emotional, has been highly professional. I'm not expecting to hear in the coming weeks that he was intentionally not picking players that wear the Nottingham Forest badge. I don't think any manager would do that. It's more that you get this late influx of signings and they've had no time. They've had no pre-season with the group. So even if they're match fit and they've done their pre-season elsewhere, they haven't had the ability to bed in under the manager. And then I think as you look to leave the club, and Nuno will have known since late August he was likely to go, you start picking your more kind of trusted players to try and get results, because you're still ultimately in the shop window. How you perform when people think you're going, but you're still at a club, the professionalism you show when you leave a club, these are all ways that managers keep themselves in the shop window. And I fully expect Nuno to be in big demand, because my feeling is there's not really a right and wrong here. There's just a fit. And obviously, if you're a Forest fan and you hear, we're going to win trophies under Postecoglou, we're going to play more attack-minded football, all the signings are going to be really happy, we're going to be even more ambitious than last season, you think, brilliant. But from Nuno's perspective, he probably thinks, we wouldn't even be anywhere close to where we are now with any of these players if he hadn't come in and qualified the football club for European football. So I think once the drama and the tension and the emotion dies down, we'll very much look at the modern Nottingham Forest project as quite linked, even though if you think philosophically, it's a huge leap to go from the style of Nuno to Ange. But if you just look at the history, it's like Steve Cooper takes the club back up. Then Nuno qualifies for Europe. And now the feeling is within Forest, Ange has got the most pressure because he has to sustain that European qualification in some capacity and ultimately try and do what he's done at every other club he's been at so far and bring a trophy.
Fascinating. I know you've got to go, so I got one final question for you. Were there any other real candidates in line for this? Because we've seen so many names linked, Marco Silva being linked. There was the uncertainty with Glasner. There's been a few other managers as well that have been chucked around. Was there any credibility in any of these? Or because we know there's a relationship, say, with Silva and Marinakis, for example.
Yeah, there was
truth in any of these?
3 names were looked at. Last night, Forest sources were briefing the likes of Glasner and Silva and even Pochettino. And it wasn't something I reported. And again, no disrespect to the reporting of others. Everyone else has got their sources. But we felt last night that regardless of appreciation for several names, Postecoglou was really close. we knew also in late August that another candidate was Jose Mourinho, but he was actually ruled out very quickly because there's no synergy, there's no continuity of what Marinakis is looking for with Mourinho's style. So if you're hiring for style and you want Ange, then quite clearly you get rid of Nuno and you don't hire Jose Mourinho. So he was a candidate in the sense when they were debating what they wanted, he was discussed, but it didn't go any further than that to my knowledge. And I think there was a very realistic consideration for Marco Silva too, because he's got a release clause. He's not entirely happy at Fulham. But in the end, the feeling was that Ange would have a better relationship with Edu and would be more functional in this kind of multi-club group. And the last aspect is just that there's a lot of staff that you wouldn't necessarily get with an incumbent manager as easy. If you think Thomas Frank to Spurs, he took some, but he wasn't able to bring everybody. Whereas with Ange Postecoglou, a fair few of his reliable backroom staff are also available in the market or gettable if they've gone into other jobs. So as we revealed on TalkSport, Milijedinic is one person that we expect to come in as an assistant coach, as he was at Spurs. And the most interesting one to look at is Scott Munn. And I don't think anything's imminent there. So I reported it and I said in line, and that's because sometimes with these recruitment personnel, it's a longer process due to the fact that Postecoglou can pick his assistant, but he can't say, I want this person as my recruitment expert. I want this person as my director of football. That also requires Edu and naturally chemistry with him and Marinakis himself. But what I am told is that Ross Wilson, highly regarded sporting director, is expected to go to Newcastle at some point. So there will be one more vacancy for somebody to kind of oversee Forest specific recruitment and work under Edu, because everyone's sort of assuming that Edu is Forest everything, but over time his role is obviously very global and he's looking after the whole multi-club network and he's going to try and buy a club in Brazil and all of that. So somebody will have to come in if, as expected, Ross Wilson departs and be that kind of head honcho. And it wouldn't surprise me from speaking to sources in the last 48 hours if that's Scott Munn. He'll certainly get an interview. He's definitely under consideration. He's definitely been mentioned by Ange Postecoglou as somebody that he would like as part of the team. But the difference between Milijedinic, where Postecoglou can just say, I want him, fine, done, and Scott Munn is after that recommendation, there's still the senior leadership team at Nottingham Forest and ultimately the owner that would have to take the final call. So obviously keep an eye on the departure of Ross Wilson and when that comes and how imminent it is, and then wait and see. But there's a very realistic possibility, I think, that we hear a lot more about Scott Munn and Nottingham Forest in the coming weeks.
Fantastic. Ben, I know you've got to jump off, so I don't want to hold you any longer, but as always, fascinating insights, and good luck for Leicester this season, mate.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we get back up. We take 6 points off you next season, but it's good, honestly. I mean, I know we have the rivalry. We've said it before, but I love Forest. And, you know, Forest in my generation was kind of the big brother with the big history, and it was just sort of before my time. But you knew about it. You knew what they'd done under Clough. They were still sort of in the Premier League, and Leicester were this sort of yo-yo club. And instead of seeing it as rivalry, I always used to like going to the City Ground. I like the kit. I like the history. So, of course, we're rivals. And when we play on the pitch, I want to thrash Nottingham Forest as a Leicester City fan. But as a person and a journalist, I just love it when a club that has always been a bit of an underdog and has always had these fantastic stories of succeeding and thriving in the community is kind of back there playing on the European stage. And personally, even as a Leicester fan, I'm really, really excited to see how you fare in the Europa League.
Yeah, best of luck. I'll let you go, Ben, but thank you so much, buddy. I really do appreciate your time as always, and we'll catch up soon.
We'll speak soon. Look forward to it. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yes, all the best. All right, guys, so there you go. The insight from Ben there. The whole Adama thing, exactly what we told you about on Patreon, is true. There was a bust up between not Marinakis, Nuno and Edu over the signing of it. And Adama was contacted and basically was told there's been no approach made. So you Patreonees, you got the inside exclusive on that. What are you guys thinking about what Ben's had to say there? I think it's very fascinating to hear. I'll just catch up on the super chats as well. Shout out to you, Darren. Sorry, I didn't want to bring them up and cut Ben's flows, but I do appreciate the super chats. Darren says, get behind the new coach. I'm behind him. You know, you guys know I want this expansive football, so I'm kind of looking forward to it. but my phone is still not stopped from the Ops fans. Thank you so much, Darren, for the 199. Massive thank you to Mark as well for the £10. He says, let's go and hammer Arsenal now. Come on, you Reds. We need a manager bounce. Could they get a manager bounce and really set us off running against Arsenal this weekend? Shout out to you, Mark. Thank you so much. And a massive big up to David as well with the 15 months. Look, guys, we're going to do Grumpy Old Reds at about 6 tonight, where we'll break down and go into the details of everything. That we've had the shock factor of Ange coming in, but honestly, if Marinakis trusts him, I trust Marinakis. Marinakis isn't going to make a decision lightly. I hope you've enjoyed the insight from Ben Jacobs there. I think there was some huge bits of information he shared with us with the likely departure of Ross Wilson as well, that position being opened up. So Forest are going through a little bit of a change here. We need these changes to settle in quickly, sort it out, and then we can just address the most important thing, which is on the pitch. So I will see you guys at 6 p.m. unless something else breaks in between there. I'm off on about 100 other channels now. They're all calling for me. So please do hit the like button. Please do subscribe. We'll see you on Grumpy Old Reds. Come on, you Reds. And I'll send you over, because I might be jumping, if I can, onto Monster's stream. So let me just quickly send you guys over there, just in case I do jump on. Send. Actually, it's still live on F. I'll send you that. All right, in a bit, guys.